Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
March 8th, 1965, 9 a.m., Da Nang, South Vietnam, Red Beach 2. 4 U.S. Navy ships, USS Henrico, USS Vancouver, USS Union, USS Mount McKinley, sit offshore. The first landing craft hits the beach. Marines from Battalion Landing Team 39 wade ashore. Full combat gear, M14 rifles. They're the first acknowledged U.S. combat troops to land in Vietnam. Their mission, officially, to protect the airbase at Da Nang. Defensive operations only. Free up South Vietnamese forces for offensive operations against the Viet Cong. Simple, limited, temporary. Waiting on the beach, South Vietnamese officials, American officers, journalists, and young Vietnamese women handing out flower leis to the Marines. It looks like a welcoming ceremony, not the beginning of a war. 8 years later, when the last American combat troops leave Vietnam, 58,000 Americans will be dead. 3 million Vietnamese will be dead. The United States will have lost its first war. And everyone will ask, how did we get here? The answer starts here. March 8th, 1965, with 3,500 Marines landing to protect an airbase. This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Let us examine how this unfolds. And here's what is interesting about this moment. March 8th, 1965, is the day the United States officially committed combat troops to Vietnam. However, no one thought they were starting a war. Not the Marines who landed, not the commanders who sent them, not the president who authorized it. They thought they were taking a limited defensive action to protect American assets and advisors already in Vietnam. A temporary measure. A bridging operation until the South Vietnamese could handle security on their own. Understanding what happened requires holding both truths simultaneously. The decision to send Marines was rational, limited, and defensive, and it was the first step into a quagmire that would consume America for the next decade. Let me build the clock for you on how we got here. Vietnam was a French colony until 1954. The French fought to keep it after World War II. Lost. The Geneva Accords divided the country. Communist North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh. Non-communist South Vietnam under Ngo Dinh Diem. The division was supposed to be temporary. The 1956 elections were scheduled to reunify the country. The elections never happened. South Vietnam, backed by the United States, refused to hold them. They feared correctly that Ho Chi Minh would win. By the early 1960s, communist insurgents in South Vietnam, the Viet Cong, were gaining strength. They wanted to overthrow the Diem government and reunify Vietnam under communist rule. North Vietnam supported them with supplies, training, and eventually troops. The United States, operating under the domino theory, the idea that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow, decided South Vietnam had to be defended. President Eisenhower sent military advisors. President Kennedy increased the number to about 16,000 by late 1963. They trained South Vietnamese forces. They didn't engage in combat officially. Then came the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964. North Vietnamese patrol boats allegedly attacked U.S. destroyers. The details were murky. The second attack probably didn't happen, but Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving President Johnson broad authority to use military force in Vietnam without declaring war. By early 1965, the situation was deteriorating. The Viet Cong were winning. The South Vietnamese army was struggling. American advisors and the air bases from which they operated were vulnerable. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, requested combat troops to protect those bases, not to fight the war, to provide security so that South Vietnamese forces could focus on offensive operations. President Johnson approved. On March 8, 1965, the Marines landed. Now picture this. Red Beach 2, Da Nang, March 8, 1965. The Marines come ashore expecting what? Combat? Hostile fire? Ambush? Instead, they're greeted by South Vietnamese officials, American officers, journalists, and young women with flowers. Brigadier General Frederick Clark, commanding the Marines, walks up the beach. The press takes photos. The Marines set up a defensive perimeter. Within hours, they're digging in around the airbase. Their orders are clear. Defensive operations only. Protect the base. Protect American personnel. Do not engage in offensive combat. The mission seems limited, achievable, and sensible. But think about the logic. You send combat troops to protect an airbase. The Viet Cong attacks the perimeter. Do the Marines sit inside the wire and wait? Or do they patrol the area, establish buffer zones, and conduct sweeps to keep the enemy at bay? The answer was obvious. Within weeks, the Marines were conducting offensive patrols, not because the mission changed. Defensive operations require offensive action to be effective. And here's where it gets complicated. Each step in the escalation was logical. Each decision was a response to conditions on the ground. Nobody was trying to start a major war, but each small step led to the next. April 1965. President Johnson authorizes Marines to conduct offensive operations, not just defensive. The mission expands. July 1965, Johnson commits 50,000 additional troops and authorizes a draft to meet manpower needs. The war is no longer limited. By December 1965, we had 184,000 American troops in Vietnam. By December 1966, there were 385,000. By December 1967, up to 486,000. At the peak in 1968, our commitment was 536,000 American troops fighting a full-scale war. At each stage, commanders requested more troops to accomplish the mission. Johnson approved because the alternative, withdrawal and allowing South Vietnam to fall, seemed worse. The logic was, we're already committed. Pulling out now would waste the sacrifices already made. Just a few more troops, just a little more time. We're making progress. Except they weren't making progress, not the kind that mattered. Here's what troubles me about the Vietnam War. The United States had overwhelming military superiority, better equipment, better training, air superiority, naval superiority, firepower that North Vietnam and the Viet Cong couldn't match. And none of it mattered, because this wasn't a conventional war where you capture territory and force surrender. This was a guerrilla war where the enemy could blend into the population, control the countryside at night, retreat into Laos and Cambodia when pressured, and wait out the Americans. The U.S. military measured success by body counts, the number of enemies killed. The numbers looked good on paper, but they were meaningless. For every Viet Cong killed, another recruit would join. The North Vietnamese were willing to take casualties that would have broken any Western military. They were fighting for the unification of their country. They could outlast the Americans. General Westmoreland's strategy was attrition. kill so many enemy soldiers that North Vietnam gives up. It failed because North Vietnam's breaking point was higher than the United States' political will. Meanwhile, the South Vietnamese government that the U.S. was defending was corrupt, unpopular, and unstable. A series of coups in the mid-1960s demonstrated its fragility. American troops were fighting for a government that many South Vietnamese didn't support. The war became unwinnable, not because of American military failure. The troops fought well, but because the political objectives were unachievable through military means. The Tet Offensive in early 1968 fundamentally changed the course of the war. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched simultaneous attacks across South Vietnam. Militarily, it was a disaster for them. They took massive casualties and didn't hold any of the territory they briefly captured. But politically, it was a strategic victory. The American public observed that after 3 years of war and hundreds of thousands of troops, the enemy could still launch major, coordinated attacks. The promised light at the end of the tunnel appeared to be a lie. Public support for the war collapsed. President Johnson announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Peace talks began in Paris. But the war dragged on for 5 more years before the last American combat troops left in 1973. 2 years later, North Vietnam conquered South Vietnam. The communist victory that American involvement was supposed to prevent happened anyway. We're still living with the lessons of March 8, 1965. Every modern military intervention faces the same questions. What's the mission? What's the exit strategy? How do we avoid mission creep? When does defensive become offensive? When does protection become occupation? Iraq 2003. Enter to remove Saddam Hussein. Stay to stabilize the country. Face an insurgency. Commit more troops. Eventually withdraw, leaving the country unstable. Afghanistan 2001. Enter to remove the Taliban. Stay to build a stable government. Face an insurgency. Commit more troops for 20 years. Eventually withdraw. The Taliban takes over within weeks. The pattern repeats because the challenge is structural. Limited military intervention with clear objectives can work. But when you commit troops to defend a weak government against an insurgency fueled by genuine grievances, military force alone can't solve the problem. Vietnam taught us that lesson. We seem to keep forgetting it. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who helped escalate the Vietnam War, later wrote, "We were wrong, terribly wrong. We owe it to future generations to explain why." His book, published in 1995, identified 11 major causes for the failure. Among them, misjudging enemy determination, failing to understand Vietnamese history and culture, believing that military force could solve political problems, escalating without clear objectives. McNamara sought to explain how intelligent, well-intentioned people made catastrophic decisions. The answer isn't that they were stupid or evil. The answer is that they were trapped by Cold War logic, domestic political pressures, and the sunk cost fallacy. The idea that you can't quit because that would waste the sacrifices already made. So what do we make of March 8, 1965? The Marines who landed at Da Nang were deployed to protect an airbase. Limited mission, defensive operations. It made sense. The South Vietnamese government was struggling. American advisors and facilities were vulnerable. Sending combat troops to provide security was a logical response. And it was the first step into a war that killed 58,000 Americans and 3 million Vietnamese and ended in defeat. Both things are true. In my view, March 8, 1965 illustrates mission creep, about how each small, rational decision can lead to a massive, irrational commitment, about how defensive missions become offensive wars. about how limited interventions spiral into unlimited commitments. It also teaches us to respect the people who fought. The Marines who landed that day weren't making policy. They were following orders. They served honorably in an unwinnable war. The strategic failure was at the top, not on the ground. And it teaches us that good intentions and military superiority aren't enough. You can have the best trained, best equipped military in the world and still lose if the political objectives are unachievable. Vietnam showed the limits of American power, not because the military failed, but because military power has limits. Some problems can't be solved by force. Some wars can't be won because the definition of victory is impossible to achieve. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, ask yourself, when does a limited mission become an unlimited war? How do we distinguish between necessary commitment and mission creep? What's the cost of staying versus the cost of leaving? Because that's what March 8th, 1965 teaches us. Not just about Vietnam, but about how good intentions and incremental decisions can lead us into quagmires we never intended to enter. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.